the idea of family in these two characters, in Carter and Sadie. There's magic and there's heroics and there's adventure, but the theme of family, both in the Percy Jackson books and in these books, it really strikes me. And I think in a lot of young adult literature and kids' books, there's always the problem of the parents. What do we do with the parents, And the often used solution, I think, is that the child is an orphan. And if you're Disney, then the child becomes an orphan 5 or 10 minutes into the movie, right? And, Bambi will always haunt me for that. But in your books, the family, the parents especially, are so integral to the plot. They're so wonderfully woven into the plot, and the stakes are so high with the family. Is this something that you were consciously working on, the idea of family, or is this just something that's bubbling up inside of you?
I think it's a little of both. I get what you're saying about the orphan problem, and I think that's very true in a lot of, especially fantasy. If your parents were around taking care of you, well, then you're not going to go off and, no, Johnny, you can't save the world tonight, it's your bedtime. But if you're on your own for some strange reason, then it seems really much more dangerous and much more interesting, and there's a lot more peril involved. But I also think that parents are pretty important, and so I had to find a way to kind of make it so that they're not in the picture, but they're still very important, and you still have to kind of figure out what happened to them. I mean, I don't think I'm giving away very much to say, right at the very beginning, Carter and Sadie's dad disappears as part of this huge magical accident, and they really don't know what's happened to him. So a big part of this is figuring out what was their dad up to? What were all these secrets that he never told them about this magic school that he's part of, and how did they get it back? So yeah, family's pretty important.
Was it difficult dealing with the Egyptian myths, sort of going back to what we were talking about before? You mentioned earlier that the Greek myths are pretty well known, I think, right? And everybody sort of knows the big Zeus, and you certainly put a unique spin on them in the Percy Jackson books, but the Egyptian ones are a little rarer. You said that your students really enjoyed them. Did you find it easier or harder to work with the Egyptian gods in this book, the Egyptian myth?
Well, I think it's true that most people don't know as much about the Egyptian gods. I mean, we know about Egypt, and Egypt is something that we really still love. I mean, all you have to do is look at the lines for the King Tut exhibit. It's something that just never goes out of style. People love the idea of the mummies and the hieroglyphs, the pyramids, the curses. There's a bunch of cool stuff, but the gods, those stories really aren't known very well. So I did have to do a little more work to make sure that I was giving all that information, but making it fun and making you feel like you understood what was going on and you were having a good adventure without feeling like you were getting lost in all these weird names. So that was probably the biggest challenge. On the other hand, it was fun because nobody's ever really done that before. Nobody's ever used the Egyptian gods in a fantasy before, so it was fun to kind of create everything from scratch.
It made me feel like an Egyptian expert for a few minutes. I was walking around my house telling my wife everything I know. Another great thing about this book, being a New Yorker myself, is I never realized how much Egypt is in New York City. It's everywhere, guys, and when you read the book, you're going to see that Egypt is everywhere. But you don't live here. Did you spend a lot of time looking at the New York City landmarks, the Cleopatra's Needle, and visiting the Met? I mean, did you spend a lot of time here, research, or Google? I mean, how did you come about?
Well, my wife's family is from Long Island, so that's sort of the family connection, and that's why Camp Half-Blood is on Long Island. It's sort of my wife's side of the family. I've always loved the New York area, even though I've never lived here. And being an author, being in the publishing industry, I come here a lot for work, and I come here a lot to do events. So I feel like I know New York reasonably well. But it's just sort of a public domain landscape. New York is a place everyone can appreciate. Even if you don't live here. It's a city that is very much on the minds of everyone, and it's a world-known place. And so it's a natural place to set a fantasy. It's a lot of fun to work with New York. It's a canvas that can take just about any kind of story.
Well, what do you guys think? At this point, I mean, we've talked a lot about the book and about Egypt, and hopefully whetted your appetites a little bit. Do you guys think you'd like to maybe hear a little bit of the book read aloud? No, you don't want to?
That is the one kid who's read it already.
So, well, why don't we do it like this? is, why don't you set up the piece that's going to be read for us, and give us a little bit of what we need to know, and then Sonia will come out and do a delightful reading for us. How about that?
That's great. All right. So where we are in this, and it's not going to give away too much if you haven't read it, don't worry, but Carter and Sadie are having a really, really bad Christmas. They got together, they only see each other twice a year. They got together, their dad took them to the British Museum in London. There was this huge accident, Dad is gone. Their uncle, Amos, appeared suddenly and whisked them off to New York without telling them what's going on. So they're at Amos's mansion. They really don't know what is going on, what the explosion was, who their family is. They have no idea. And Amos at breakfast says, something's come up, I have to leave. Stay here, don't leave the house, and whatever you do, don't go in my library. And that will tell you probably what you think is going to happen next.